The Middle Ages were an age of powerful scents. To walk through a medieval town was to be overwhelmed by a storm of odors, pungent smoke from hearths, the reek of tanners' pits, the sour stench of unwashed bodies, and the constant waft of refuse dumped into streets. Life was lived nose-deep in smell, both pleasant and foul, and so perfume was more than luxury. It was armor. A single vial of rosewater, a pouch of crushed herbs, or a glove steeped in musk could draw a line between elegance and squalor, between survival and decay. Imagine stepping into a crowded medieval hall. The rushes strewn across the floor are scattered with mint, lavender, and sweet marjoram to cover the scent of spilled ale and sweat-soaked garments. The nobles in their fine gowns carry pomanders, small golden spheres filled with ambergris and cloves that they lift discreetly to their noses. In the corner, servants fan the air with bundles of rosemary, believing the fragrance itself could ward off pestilence. To the medieval mind, a sweet scent was not only a pleasure but a shield, proof that beauty might hold back corruption. For scent was not merely earthly, it was spiritual, symbolic, and deeply feared. Medieval physicians believed that disease spread through miasma, poisoned air that seeped into the lungs and corrupted the blood. If foul odors brought sickness, then sweet ones must preserve life. Thus, perfumes became medicine, protection, even prayer. A noblewoman might sleep with a sachet of dried roses and cinnamon under her pillow to guard her dreams. A merchant traveling through plague-ridden towns would wear gloves soaked in violet water to purify every breath. The belief was universal. To breathe fragrance was to breathe life. Yet perfume was also power. Only the wealthy could afford the rarest ingredients: ambergris carried by ships from far seas, musk gathered from the wild musk deer of Asia, frankincense from the deserts of Arabia. To enter a hall perfumed with these scents was to proclaim wealth greater than gold, for fragrance clung to fabric, lingered in hair, and marked out the elite as though the very air around them bowed in reverence. But perfumes were not confined to courts and chambers alone. They wafted through cathedrals, where priests swung censers heavy with frankincense, filling sacred spaces with a haze of fragrance. To worshippers, this was no mere odor, but a bridge to the divine, a smoke that carried prayers heavenward. The same resins prized in temples of Egypt and Rome now sanctified Christian rituals, their ancient mystery woven into the heartbeat of medieval faith. Still, beneath the elegance and sanctity lurked whispers of suspicion. Was it right, some asked, to cloak the stench of sin with the sweetness of roses? Clerics thundered against perfumes as indulgences of vanity, distractions from spiritual purity. Yet even the harshest critics could not silence the allure of fragrance, for its pull was as irresistible as the flicker of a flame in darkness. And so medieval life unfolded in paradox, a world drowning in odors, where perfumes promised both protection and temptation. They were at once medicine and seduction, prayer and indulgence, fear and fascination. Each vial of rosewater, each clove-stuffed pomander carried secrets, secrets of health, wealth, and desire. This is the world we enter, the world of medieval perfumes, where fragrance was not a mere adornment, but a force that touched every breath, every prayer, every kiss. To understand it is to glimpse the very soul of the Middle Ages, its beauty, its superstition, its longing to tame both body and spirit through the power of scent. Long before medieval Europe discovered the secrets of fragrance, the ancient world had already built empires upon it. From the temples of Egypt to the baths of Rome, perfume was not merely a luxury, but a necessity of ritual, health, and power. When the medieval age dawned, it inherited this vast legacy, though filtered through centuries of collapse, conquest, and cultural exchange. The medieval vial of rosewater was, in truth, the last echo of ancient scents carried forward through time. The Egyptians were among the first great perfumers, blending resins like myrrh and frankincense into balms used for both the living and the dead. To them, fragrance was eternal. It sanctified temples and guided souls into the afterlife. Their recipes, guarded by priests, traveled with merchants across the Mediterranean, seeding the idea that perfume was a substance both earthly and divine. The Greeks adopted these practices, entwining scent with beauty, athletics, and philosophy. A perfumed athlete, oiled with myrtle and roses, symbolized not vanity, but harmony between body and spirit. Rome, however, transformed perfume into spectacle. Roman nobles bathed in scented waters, perfumed their clothes, even sprinkled fragrance on banquets so that guests dined beneath clouds of incense. Stories tell of Emperor Nero, who once drenched his palace in rosewater, and of streets where perfume sellers displayed their exotic wares like treasure. The fall of Rome did not erase this culture, but fractured it, leaving behind scattered fragments of knowledge to be rediscovered in the Middle Ages. The true guardians of perfume during Europe's dark centuries were the Byzantines and the Islamic world. In Constantinople, court life shimmered with scented oils imported from the East. In the Arab world, alchemists perfected the art of distillation, capturing the essence of flowers more purely than ever before. It was through them that rosewater, jasmine oil, and exotic spices entered medieval Europe, carried along trade routes that wound from Damascus to Venice. The Crusades, bloody though they were, became conduits of fragrance. Knights returned not only with relics and scars, but with the memory of Eastern perfumes that haunted European courts. By the 12th century, monasteries in Europe began preserving and adapting this knowledge. Monks, tending herb gardens, distilled rosemary, lavender, and sage, blending them into medicinal waters. What had once been sacred ritual in Egypt or decadent indulgence in Rome became, in the cloisters, part of healing. In the hands of the Church, perfume gained new respectability, transformed into holy water and sacramental incense. The lineage was clear. Ancient gods had ceded their scents to medieval saints. Yet the Middle Ages added its own twist to the inheritance. Where Rome had indulged and Byzantium had refined, medieval Europe imbued perfume with fear. Disease haunted every breath, and the memory of the Black Death taught that foul air could kill as swiftly as a blade. Thus, perfumes were not merely pleasant, they were talismans. A sprig of rosemary at one's breast, a pouch of cloves at the belt, a vial of rosewater pressed to the lips. All were echoes of the ancient world, repurposed for survival in an age of shadows. The story of medieval perfume, then, is not one of invention, but of adaptation. Europe borrowed from the past, from distant lands and forgotten empires, reshaping fragrance into something both practical and mystical. To breathe in rosewater in a medieval hall was to inhale history itself, for within its sweet mist lingered the breath of Egypt, Greece, Rome, Byzantium, and the East. In this way, medieval perfumes were bridges across time, carrying ancient secrets into a new age. And with every puff of incense or splash of scented water, the Middle Ages reminded itself that fragrance was more than luxury. It was legacy. To create perfume in the Middle Ages was to draw upon the riches of both field and sea, garden and desert, forest and mountain. Each scent carried its own story, a tale of rarity, danger, and desire. The vial of rosewater clutched by a noblewoman, the sachet of herbs tied to a pilgrim's belt, the golden censer wafting smoke in a cathedral. All of them began with humble roots, petals, resins, spices, and musks gathered from every corner of the known world. Foremost among these was the rose. In medieval gardens, roses were cultivated not only for beauty, but for their fragrance. Their petals were plucked at dawn, when dew preserved their sweetness, and crushed or distilled into rosewater. This floral essence perfumed skin, flavored food, and sanctified rituals. Alongside roses bloomed violets, lilies, and iris, their delicate scents mingling with herbs such as lavender, rosemary, and sage, staples of both kitchen and apothecary. These local ingredients gave Europe a base of fragrant familiarity, woven into daily life. But the heart of medieval perfume beat with rarities brought from afar. Ambergris, a strange treasure cast up from the bellies of whales, was more valuable than gold. To some it smelled sweet and earthy, to others it reeked of the sea. Yet when blended with oils, it lent perfume a depth and longevity unmatched by flowers alone. Musk, harvested from the glands of deer in distant Asia, added an animal warmth, an almost sinful intensity that clung to garments and lingered in chambers. These were not scents for peasants, but for kings, their rarity marking them as emblems of wealth and exotic power. Resins formed another cornerstone of fragrance. Frankincense and myrrh, brought along caravan routes from Arabia, filled churches with sacred smoke. Benzoin and storax, sticky gums from distant trees, added sweet and balsamic notes to blends. To medieval worshippers, these resins were more than aromas. They were the very breath of heaven, proof that God's presence could be made manifest in the air. Their use was so prized that wars were fought over the trade routes that carried them. Spices, too, entered the realm of perfume. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and cardamom, imported from the East, were pounded into powders or steeped into oils. While nobles sprinkled them over banquets, perfumers used them to create warm, intoxicating blends. A glove perfumed with cloves spoke of refinement. A sachet of cinnamon carried on one's person suggested both elegance and protection against disease. In the medieval mind, these scents had power not only over the senses, but over the body's very humors. Even humble plants found their way into perfumed life. Meadowsweet, marjoram, and thyme-scented rushes scattered across castle floors, masking odors and sweetening the air. Mint and fennel freshened breath, while sage and bay were believed to sharpen the mind. For the poor, these herbs were the perfumes of daily survival, gathered from hedgerows rather than shipped across oceans. The crafting of perfume was not only about choosing ingredients, but about blending opposites: sweet with sharp, floral with musky, earthly with divine. A skilled perfumer knew how to balance rose with resin, musk with violet, lavender with clove. To hold a medieval vial of scent was to hold a harmony of worlds, each drop containing both the familiar blossoms of a local garden and the distant mysteries of foreign shores. In truth, the ingredients of medieval perfume were maps made aromatic. They told of fields where peasants plucked herbs at dawn, of merchants braving storms to carry spices, of apothecaries grinding powders by candlelight, and of nobles who paid dearly to hold these essences in crystal bottles. Each fragrance was not only a luxury, it was a story distilled, a mingling of earth's most secret treasures. If the ingredients of medieval perfumes were jewels of nature, then distillation was the art that unlocked their brilliance. In dim workshops and monastic laboratories, amid the hiss of boiling water and the drip of condensed vapor, The medieval perfumer turned petals into potions, resins into oils, and herbs into fragrant waters. It was here, in the marriage of fire and glass, that perfume ceased to be mere plant or spice and became something greater: essence, spirit, the very soul of scent. The roots of distillation stretched back to ancient Mesopotamia and Greece, but it was in the Islamic world that the technique blossomed into true mastery. Scholars and alchemists such as Avicenna refined the use of the alembic still, a vessel of copper or glass designed to heat a substance until its fragrant vapors could be captured, cooled, and condensed into liquid. From this innovation came the purest rosewater Europe had ever known, its aroma strong enough to perfume chambers or flavor entire banquets. When the knowledge crossed into Europe through trade and conquest, it changed the art of fragrance forever. In a medieval stillroom, the process was both science and sorcery. Imagine a copper alembic set above a crackling fire. Rose petals, gathered at dawn, are steeped in water and sealed inside. As the liquid simmers, steam rises, carrying with it the delicate oils of the flower. The vapors travel through a slender pipe, cooling as they pass, until they drip, drop by drop, into a waiting vessel. What emerges is not merely water, it is rose water, essence distilled from thousands of petals, a treasure worth more than silver. Not all perfumes were distilled. Some were made by enfleurage, pressing blossoms into fats until the oils absorbed their scent. Others were tinctures, in which herbs and spices were steeped in alcohol or vinegar. But distillation held a special allure, for it seemed to capture the pure spirit of a plant, separating the immortal fragrance from its mortal body. To many, this was nothing short of alchemy, the transformation of the natural into the divine. Monasteries became centers of this fragrant art. Monks distilled lavender, rosemary, and sage not only for perfumes, but for medicinal waters believed to cure ailments of the heart, stomach, and mind. A vial of distilled rosemary water might soothe headaches. Lavender water could calm nerves. The boundary between perfume and medicine blurred until fragrance itself was seen as both healing and holy. Secular perfumers, too, embraced distillation. In towns like Paris, Venice, and London, artisans set up stills in back rooms, filling the air with the mingled scents of herbs, spices, and boiling water. Their wares ranged from simple rosewater sold to common folk to exotic blends of musk and ambergris reserved for nobles. To step into a perfumer's workshop was to enter a world of fragrance thick as mist, where apprentices scurried with vessels, and masters guarded their recipes as jealously as knights guarded swords. Distillation also played a role in fear. During plague years, physicians carried pomanders filled with distilled herbs, convinced the vapors would ward off pestilence. People dabbed scented waters on their wrists, their temples, their lips, hoping each drop might keep death at bay. In a time when foul air was thought to carry disease, distilled fragrance was more than adornment. It was survival. To watch a medieval distiller at work was to see a figure straddling two worlds, craftsman and magician, chemist and dreamer. The hiss of steam, the gleam of copper, the careful collection of each drop. These were rituals as sacred as prayers, and in the vial at the end, clear as crystal and sweet as dawn, lay the essence of something greater, the distilled spirit of a flower, the bottled breath of heaven itself. When we think of perfume today, we imagine elegance, intimacy, and beauty. But in the Middle Ages, perfume was also practical, woven into daily routines, layered upon bodies, clothes, and even the very walls of a home. In a world where running water was rare and bathing infrequent, fragrance became not only a pleasure but a necessity, masking the omnipresent stench of medieval life. For nobles, perfume was inseparable from display. A lord might enter his hall with his cloak faintly perfumed with musk or ambergris, announcing his wealth before speaking a word. A lady's gloves could be steeped in violet water, so that every gesture released a whisper of sweetness. Perfumed oils were combed through hair, and gowns were sprinkled with rosewater before great feasts. Nobility carried their scents like banners, using fragrance to proclaim refinement, piety, or even seduction. But even in more modest homes, perfume found its place. Housewives hung sachets of dried lavender, thyme, and marjoram in cupboards to ward off insects and sour smells. Herbs were strewn across floors, crushed underfoot to release their fragrance as people walked. A basin of rose or rosemary water might be placed at the door for guests to rinse their hands before meals, both for hygiene and hospitality. For the common folk, perfume was rarely exotic or expensive. It was simple, homemade, and rooted in herbs grown in their own gardens. Markets brimmed with scent. Spice traders displayed cinnamon and cloves beside merchants selling sacks of dried rose petals or sprigs of rosemary. Apothecaries sold vials of lavender water for headaches, sachets of mint for fresh breath, and pomanders filled with scented herbs to carry against disease. Perfume, in these stalls, was not vanity but survival, a fragrant weapon against foul air and illness. Perfumes also marked life's milestones. A newborn might be bathed in lavender water, both to cleanse and to bless. Brides carried rosemary sprigs as symbols of love and fidelity, their scent rising above the hymns of the wedding mass. The dead, too, were shrouded in fragrance. Bodies were washed in rosewater or wrapped with herbs to sweeten the long vigil before burial. In this way, perfume accompanied medieval people from cradle to grave, each stage of life touched by scent. Yet fragrance was not evenly shared. The poor rarely saw ambergris or musk. Their perfumes were garlic hung in kitchens, sage boiling in stew pots, or rushes sprinkled with pennyroyal. Theirs was the scent of necessity, not luxury. Still, even they sought comfort in fragrance, carrying sprigs of mint or thyme on pilgrimages, or burning herbs in small clay pots during winter nights. Smell was democratic. It clung to everyone, high and low, and so everyone sought to master it in whatever way they could. Public life, too, was infused with fragrance. In churches, incense poured from censers, filling the air with sacred smoke. Markets were saturated with spices. Even legal rituals bore scent. Some contracts were sealed not only with wax, but with sachets of herbs, a reminder that smell carried weight in memory and meaning. A medieval town might reek of dung and smoke, but pockets of perfume, churches, feasts, weddings, offered moments of sweet escape. Perfume was not only about what was worn, but also about what was endured. To live in a medieval city was to live with constant smells: the tanner's workshop, the butcher's yard, the privy pit. In this storm of stench, perfume became a form of control, a small mastery of chaos. Whether in the form of rosewater sprinkled on garments or herbs tucked into shoes, it was a way to reclaim dignity from a world that smelled of filth. Thus, perfume in daily life was everywhere, in noble halls, village cottages, bustling markets, and sacred cathedrals. It was luxury and necessity, joy and protection, identity and survival. To medieval people, to breathe in fragrance was not a fleeting pleasure, but a reminder that life itself could be sweet, even when the world around them stank of hardship. To the medieval mind, the boundary between perfume and medicine was blurred, almost non-existent. Sweetness of scent was not only pleasing, it was protective. In an age before microscopes, when unseen miasmas of foul air were believed to spread sickness, fragrance was a defense as powerful as a sword. Perfumes became shields against pestilence, remedies for weakness, and even weapons against death itself. Physicians prescribed scents with the same seriousness as they did bloodletting or herbal tonics. A patient weakened by fever might be given a vial of lavender water to sniff, its cool fragrance thought to calm the humors. Cloves and cinnamon, ground into powders, were carried in small pouches around the neck to warm the heart and preserve life in the cold of winter. Vinegar of the Four Thieves, a pungent blend of herbs steeped in strong vinegar, was famed as a plague remedy, its sharp, acrid scent thought to drive away the poisoned air of contagion. During outbreaks of the Black Death, the streets filled with fragrance. Priests swung censers heavy with frankincense, fumigating homes and churches. Doctors carried pomanders, small globes of silver or gold filled with musk, ambergris, or camphor, holding them to their noses as they moved among the sick. Citizens clutched sprigs of rosemary or juniper, pressed to lips and nostrils with desperate hope. To breathe in sweetness was to survive. To breathe in foulness was to die. Bathing in scented water was also prescribed as medicine. A noble suffering from melancholy might be immersed in rose water or violet-scented baths. The fragrance meant to soothe the mind and lift the spirit. For headaches, rosemary steam was inhaled. For stomach pains, sage was steeped in wine and drunk warm. Medicine, in these moments, was inseparable from perfume, each prescription carrying as much fragrance as flavor. Perfumes were not only physical remedies, but spiritual protections. In monasteries, monks believed that fragrant herbs drove away demons as well as disease. Psalms were sung over bundles of lavender hung in dormitories, and incense clouds were thought to sanctify air made unholy by sickness. To medieval Christians, fragrance was tied to holiness itself. Saints' bodies, it was said, exuded the odor of sanctity, a miraculous sweetness that proved their purity even in death. Perfume was, therefore, not just earthly defense but heavenly sign. At times, perfumes were worn like charms. Small bags filled with marjoram, sage, or wormwood were tied to belts or sewn into clothing. Wealthier folk carried ornate pomanders dangling from chains, filled with resins and spices. These were more than fashion. They were talismans, portable fortresses of scent meant to guard the body from invisible threats. In an age when illness came without warning, such fragrant armor offered reassurance, if not certainty. The poor, too, found ways to use scent for protection. They burned juniper twigs in hearths to purify the air, scattered pennyroyal on floors, and hung garlands of garlic and onions by doors. These humble perfumes, sharp and biting, carried as much symbolic weight as musk and ambergris. They were shields within reach of any household, proof that even the lowliest could battle sickness with the power of smell. But belief in perfume as medicine was not only practical, it was psychological. Fragrance gave comfort where fear reigned. To inhale rose water in the midst of plague was to feel, if only for a moment, that beauty still lingered, that life might triumph over decay. Perfumes eased fear as much as they soothed illness, giving medieval people the courage to endure the shadow of death. Thus, perfume in the Middle Ages was more than pleasure. It was survival. Every vial of rosewater, every sprig of rosemary, every clove-filled pomander was a weapon wielded against disease and despair. To breathe was to risk death, but to breathe fragrance was to cling to hope. In that hope, as fragile as the scent of a flower at dawn, the people of the Middle Ages found their strength. If perfume could ward off death, it could also awaken life, stirring the senses, igniting longing, and binding lovers in invisible threads of desire. In the Middle Ages, scent was as much a tool of seduction as it was of survival. A glance across a hall might capture attention, but it was fragrance that lingered in memory, clinging to garments, hair, and skin long after words had faded. Courtly love, that refined dance of longing sung by troubadours, was steeped in perfume. A knight might send his lady a glove perfumed with violet water, its aroma carrying not only beauty, but a message. I breathe you in, even in your absence. A noblewoman might dab rose water on her veil, knowing that each flutter would waft sweetness toward her admirer. In a culture where overt passion was dangerous, perfume became a silent language, a way to speak of desire without words. Love letters, too, were scented. Pages sprinkled with rose petals or rubbed with musk were carried by messengers across kingdoms, their fragrance a promise that intimacy was not lost with distance. Imagine a knight in a drafty chamber, unsealing parchment that released a ghost of his lady's scent. It was as though she were beside him, her presence captured in the air. These scented missives blurred the line between body and spirit, passion and poetry. But perfumes also carried a more carnal allure. Musk, heavy and animal, was the scent of raw desire, its origins in the wild glands of deer only adding to its reputation for danger. Ambergris, sweet and marine, was said to heighten attraction. Blended into oils, these ingredients made perfumes not of roses and violets, but of fire and flesh. To wear them was to court risk, for they suggested not chastity, but seduction. In festivals and feasts, fragrance became a weapon of charm. A man might approach a lady with a pomander of ambergris, offering her a breath of rare sweetness as he bent low to speak. A woman, perfumed with cloves or cinnamon, might pass through a hall leaving behind a trail of warmth, drawing eyes and stirring whispers. To those attuned to its power, perfume was not decoration, but strategy. The association of perfume with temptation did not escape the watchful eyes of the church. Clerics warned against perfumes that stirred lust, declaring that sweet scents might lead souls toward sin. Yet even monasteries could not wholly silence desire. Stories tell of maidens perfuming themselves to ensnare knights, and of men carrying musk into trysts as offerings. If incense was the fragrance of heaven, musk was the fragrance of flesh, and the Middle Ages knew both well. Love potions, too, drew upon the power of scent. Apothecaries sold mixtures of rose, sage, and exotic spices, said to inflame passion when drunk or dabbed upon the skin. Some recipes were more dangerous. Musk blended with strange herbs, ambergris steeped in wine. Whether they truly worked or not, the belief itself was intoxicating, and many sought such remedies to conquer hearts that seemed unattainable. And yet, perfume was not always about seduction in secret. In marriage rituals, too, fragrance played its role. Brides carried rosemary and myrtle as symbols of fidelity, their sweetness binding them to their husbands. The bridal chamber might be scattered with rose petals or fumigated with incense, turning consummation into a perfumed rite of passage. In both sacred vows and whispered affairs, scent was present, shaping the memory of love. Thus, perfume in the Middle Ages was a double-edged gift, healer and seducer, prayer and temptation. It adorned brides and saints, but also cloaked lovers in secrecy and desire. To breathe in musk was to brush against danger, to inhale rosewater was to taste innocence. In the mingling of these fragrances lay the full complexity of medieval love, sacred and sinful, refined and raw, as fleeting and unforgettable as the trail of perfume left in a darkened hall. If musk and rosewater whispered of desire, incense and resins spoke of eternity. In the medieval imagination, fragrance was not confined to chambers or feasts. It filled cathedrals, cloisters, and chapels, shaping the very experience of worship. To breathe in the sweet smoke of incense was to inhale heaven itself, for scent was the language of the divine, invisible yet overwhelming, ephemeral yet eternal. The Bible itself sanctified fragrance. "Let my prayer rise before you like incense," sang the psalmist, and medieval clergy took those words literally. In vast Gothic cathedrals, priests swung golden censers heavy with frankincense, filling the air with thick, curling smoke. The faithful knelt beneath vaults that seemed to dissolve into clouds of fragrance, believing their prayers, too, rose upward with the sacred scent. Incense was not ornament, but theology, a sensory bridge between earth and heaven. Frankincense and myrrh, imported at great cost from Arabia, were the jewels of sacred fragrance. Their resins, sticky and golden, were ground, mixed, and burned on holy days. To common villagers who rarely encountered such exotic treasures, the smell of incense was otherworldly, unlike anything in their daily lives of smoke and sweat. Its very rarity gave it power. Here, in church, the air was sanctified, set apart from the stench of the outside world. But not only incense carried holiness. Holy water, too, was often perfumed with roses, lavender, or rosemary, turning purification into an act of fragrance. Chrism oil, used in baptism, confirmation, and coronation, was steeped with balsam and spices, so that the anointing of body and soul carried with it the sweetness of paradise. A child baptized into the faith, a king crowned with sacred oil, a monk professing vows, all carried the scent of sanctity upon their very skin. Monasteries were themselves perfumed spaces. Cloister gardens brimmed with lavender, sage, and rosemary, not only for medicine, but for prayer. Monks distilled these herbs into aromatic waters, sprinkling them in refectories and dormitories, both to cleanse the air and to uplift the spirit. To live within monastery walls was to live in an environment of controlled fragrance, each scent serving body and soul alike. Perfume also marked death as much as life. When saints passed away, their bodies were sometimes said to exude the odor of sanctity, a miraculous fragrance of roses or spices that signified divine favor. Chronicles record pilgrims pressing close to reliquaries, convinced they smelled the lingering sweetness of holiness. For the faithful, this was proof that the divine could penetrate even decay, transforming the stench of death into the perfume of eternity. Yet even within sacred spaces, fragrance carried tension. Some clerics denounced the overuse of perfumes, arguing that rich nobles cloaked their vanity with scents better reserved for God. Others worried that incense, with its intoxicating haze, might distract the faithful from prayer. But most accepted its power, for no service felt complete without the billowing clouds of sacred smoke, no holy rite without the whisper of roses and balsam. In truth, sacred scents were the soul of medieval religion. They transformed ritual into experience, binding memory and meaning through the invisible threads of smell. A villager might forget the words of a sermon, but remember the scent of frankincense filling the nave. A knight on crusade might recall not the hymns, but the perfume of myrrh rising above the clamor of prayer. To medieval Christians, fragrance was faith made tangible, a reminder that the unseen could still be felt, breathed, and carried within the heart. Thus, perfume in religion was more than ritual decoration. It was prayer you could smell, Sanctity you could taste on the air. In the sacred smoke of incense and the sweetness of holy oils, the Middle Ages found proof that the divine was near, closer than breath itself. Every vial of perfume in the Middle Ages carried within it not just petals or resins, but entire empires of trade. To hold rosewater, musk, or ambergris was to hold the weight of caravans crossing deserts, ships braving storms, and merchants bargaining in crowded markets. Perfume was never merely a fragrance. It was wealth liquefied, luxury distilled, and power disguised as sweetness. The perfume trade was global long before the word had meaning. From the ports of Venice, galleys sailed eastward, laden with silver to exchange for spices, resins, and precious ingredients. Venetian merchants returned with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, along with sacks of frankincense and myrrh, destined for Europe's churches. Overland caravans trudged across the Silk Road, bearing musk from Tibet, ambergris from the Indian Ocean, and rose oil from Persia. By the time these goods reached Paris or London, their prices had multiplied 100-fold, making a drop of perfume worth more than its weight in gold. Nobility and royalty displayed their wealth through fragrance. To wear ambergris was to prove one's connection to distant oceans. To anoint with musk was to hint at ties to exotic empires. Perfume became a language of class, a silent marker separating those who could afford the treasures of the world from those who could not. In banquets and courts, the air itself was perfumed with wealth, every whiff a reminder of who held the keys to trade and power. Venice, Genoa, and later Lisbon grew rich on this scented commerce. Venetian merchants, in particular, jealously guarded their trade routes, ensuring that perfumes and spices flowed first through their ports before reaching the rest of Europe. Their control of scent mirrored their control of wealth, for whoever ruled the spice and resin trade ruled the luxuries of the continent. Kings courted these merchants as eagerly as they courted dukes, for the power of perfume could sway politics as well as pleasure. But this trade was also fraught with peril. Caravans were plagued by bandits, ships by storms and piracy. Perfume ingredients were treasures worth killing for. Chronicles tell of merchants hiding musk within bolts of cloth, disguising ambergris as wax, or smuggling frankincense in barrels of grain. The fragrance that delighted noble halls was born of danger, every vial purchased with sweat, fear, and risk. Guilds, too, rose to power through perfume. In Paris, perfumers formed associations to regulate the trade, ensuring only the finest products bore their seal. These guilds wielded influence like noble houses, deciding prices, protecting recipes, and training apprentices in the art of blending. A master perfumer was not only an artisan, but a merchant prince in miniature, commanding respect and envy alike. Perfume also served as diplomacy. A ruler might send rosewater as a gift to a foreign king, or musk oil to a visiting ambassador. Such exchanges were more than pleasantries. They were declarations of wealth and power, proof that one's reach extended beyond borders. In these gestures, perfume became politics, its sweetness masking the iron hand of empire. For the common folk, the trade of perfumes was a distant dream, their experience limited to herbs from the garden or resins burned in church. Yet even they felt the shadow of this scented economy. Taxes were levied on imported goods, wars were fought over spice routes, and the wealth of perfume merchants trickled down into the architecture of cities. The fragrance that filled cathedrals or noble feasts was a reminder to peasants that power itself could be smelled, even if they could never afford it. Thus, perfume in the Middle Ages was not only an art or a pleasure, it was a symbol of wealth, a currency of power, a trade that connected kingdoms and oceans. To follow the trail of a medieval perfume, was to follow the heartbeat of commerce itself, a network of ships, caravans, and cities bound together by the invisible thread of scent. When the medieval world began to fade, its perfumes did not vanish with it. The rosewater that cooled the brows of nobles, the incense that sanctified cathedrals, the musk and ambergris that whispered of seduction, all of these survived, transformed, and blossomed into the Renaissance and beyond. The legacy of medieval perfume is not confined to dusty manuscripts or relics. It lingers still in the fragrances we wear, the rituals we practice, and the way we imagine beauty itself. The Renaissance inherited both knowledge and appetite. Distillation, perfected in monastic still rooms and Islamic laboratories, became the foundation of modern perfumery. Apothecaries grew into specialized perfume shops, their shelves lined with bottles of rose, jasmine, and violet waters, as well as tinctures of exotic spices. Italian courts, especially in Florence, became centers of fragrance, where Catherine de' Medici carried with her perfumed gloves that would inspire French fashion for centuries. Medieval crafts had planted seeds that now bloomed into entire industries. The association of perfume with power also endured. Kings and queens of the early modern era bathed in scented waters, their courts drowning in clouds of musk, civet, and ambergris. Versailles itself would later be a palace of fragrance, every corridor perfumed to mask both filth and excess. This royal extravagance traced directly back to medieval traditions, when scent was first wielded as a symbol of wealth, class, and control. Religious uses of perfume, too, survived. Catholic churches continued to burn frankincense and myrrh, their fragrance still binding worshippers to centuries of ritual. The belief in the healing powers of scent evolved into early modern medicine, and eventually into the fields of aromatherapy and pharmacology. What medieval physicians once prescribed as scented waters to balance humors is now studied as the psychological and physical effects of fragrance on the human body. Yet perfume also carried darker legacies. The demand for rare ingredients, ambergris, musk, and exotic spices, fueled expansion, conquest, and colonization. The maritime empires of Portugal and Spain sailed not only for gold, but for pepper, cinnamon, and the fragrant treasures of the East. Later, the Dutch and English would follow, establishing trade companies that reshaped the world. In every vial of clove oil or drop of nutmeg essence was hidden the shadow of empire, born of routes first carved in medieval times. The memory of perfume in love and seduction also endured in literature and art. Poets continued to liken lovers to roses, violets, and lilies, their scent synonymous with passion. Fragrance became an aesthetic language, with entire treatises written on the virtues of different aromas. The troubadours had begun this tradition in the Middle Ages. The Renaissance amplified it, and our modern world continues it still, with perfumes marketed as promises of romance and allure. For the poor, the legacy was simpler, but no less enduring. The scattering of herbs on floors evolved into household practices of potpourri and scented sachets. Lavender in linen chests, rosemary in kitchens, mint in gardens. These humble perfumes remained part of domestic life, linking the medieval cottage to the modern home. Scent, after all, was always democratic. It clung to both king and peasant, though in different forms. Today, when we uncork a bottle of perfume, we are heirs to this medieval world. The sweetness of rosewater whispers of monastic still rooms. The spice of cinnamon recalls Venetian merchants. The smoky depth of incense carries the breath of Gothic cathedrals. Even the language of fragrance, bass notes, heart notes, top notes, echoes the medieval understanding of harmony and balance, the blending of opposites to create something greater than its parts. The Middle Ages taught us that scent is more than luxury. It is medicine, prayer, seduction, power, memory. It is invisible yet unforgettable, fleeting yet eternal. And so the legacy of medieval perfume lingers, a trail of sweetness across centuries, reminding us that to breathe in fragrance is to breathe in history itself.